A message from the human resistance.
Now to the day's other top story, foreign efforts to interfere with the U.S. presidential election.
In a press conference this afternoon, U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland outlined what he called sophisticated disinformation campaigns undertaken by Russia and other adversaries, promoting lies via fake news outlets and real social media influencers. And Garland issued this warning.
The Justice Department's message is clear. We have no tolerance for attempts by authoritarian regimes to exploit our democratic system of government. We will be relentlessly aggressive in countering and disrupting attempts by Russia and Iran, as well as China or any other foreign malign actor to interfere in our elections and undermine our democracy.
In recent days, the Biden administration's Justice Department launched an information warfare campaign to yet again attempt to tie Russian security interests to support for the Republicans and Donald Trump. News articles generally portray the accusations as a sign that Russian intelligence favors Trump. This has repeatedly been a go-to for the globalist cabal that runs the Democratic Party since they lost control of the Republicans in 2016.
Я думаю о том, что США набирает обороты.
Для нас кто лучше, Байден или Трамп?
Байден. Он человек более опытный, он прогнозируемый, он политик старой формации. Но мы будем работать с любым лидером США, которому окажет доверие американский народ.
However, this is just a disinformation campaign that is akin to a guilty party pointing the finger at someone else to distract away from their own guilt. Upon a more close examination, it turns out that Putin himself has stated openly that Biden would have been better for Russia, and later Kamala Harris, as they would be more conforming to the globalist world order's expectations. While the Democrats that blindly defended the globalist anti-nationalists would promote a Russia connection to their political opposition, the record clearly shows why Russia and the rest of the Eastern Bloc would prefer the Democrats in power in America.
There hasn't been a lot of squabbling. What we've simply said is the facts, which are that based on uniform intelligence assessments, the Russians were responsible for hacking the DNC, and that as a consequence, it is important for us to review all elements of that and make sure that we are preventing that kind of interference through cyber attacks in the future.
Ever since the loss of the 2016 election, the globalist intelligence apparatus-dominated establishment went to work sabotaging the Republicans under Donald Trump. This was equal to false accusations of treason, which typically is considered treason in itself. The point was to at least leave a lingering disruption to the non-controlled camp in an attempt to immediately begin softening up the new administration for removal as quickly as possible. The persistent attempt to draw a Russian connection is because all projections indicated that the Democrats had lost to a populist candidate that was likely to remain popular in the long term, meaning the ultra-left-wing movement that is the pillar of the Democratic Party would have been crippled entirely, and done fairly via the democratic process they claim to cherish. They decided to not allow their movement to die and went to work lying to create a narrative that scared voters away from a perfectly reasonable candidate. Donald Trump's biggest imposition to the globalists is that he has not submitted to their control. Until their uncontrolled opposition is neutralized and they control both parties again, they will not be able to rest. Obama set up the movement to be able to keep a constant pressure on the Republicans with disinformation.
No nation on earth has an interest in seeing this band of criminals arm itself with nuclear weapons and missiles. The United States has great strength and patience, but if it is forced to defend itself or its allies, we will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea. Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself and for his regime. The United States is ready, willing, and able, but hopefully this will not be necessary.
The Democrats actually attempted to portray the Christian conservative hardliner elements of the political right in America, known for also being nationalistic, as also backed by Eastern interests, yet this never made sense to the educated individual. The Democratic Party is known to be highly supported by socialist, communist, atheist, and other non-Judeo-Christian elements that seek an alternative to European-derived American society. The globalists that established dominance within the American political system had control of both major parties going back as far as George H.W. Bush, and all presidents since then, with the exception of Trump, were all part of an atheist regime whose purpose was to occupy the presidency indefinitely to make sure it could not be used to interfere with their expansion agenda. The leaders in the globalist camp have surrendered control of their efforts to an exterior anti-human power with a desire to use them to re-engineer the human race towards transhumanism. They keep loyal followers in power where they can, who will gatehold as it is called, as their seeming negligence actually turns out to be unconscious sabotage. Gateholding in this case is having a controlled candidate occupy the presidency so they can do nothing while the Eastern Bloc expands with less opposition relative to a free human candidate. All cabal presidencies were gateholder regimes, taking a short break during Trump, and immediately returning with the establishment of the Biden administration. What the Eastern Bloc can clearly see is that the globalists being in power works much better for them, and is preferable to a shift towards hardline nationalist conservatism. Yet due to the actual threat to humanity from the transhumanist collaborators, who would rather help the Eastern Bloc nations like Communist China, new populist conservatism actually turns out to be one of the few free human movements surviving on Earth in this time period.
No, wait a minute. I'm asking you a question. Is that accurate, the best?
About, but Mr. President, respectfully, since that I don't think that the issue that, do you think that people have an issue with pulling out of Afghanistan or just the way that things have happened?
I think they have an issue that people are likely to get hurt. Some, as we've seen, have gotten killed, and that it is.
One thing is certain. The outside world saw the Democrats putting their focus into internal power struggles, filtering non-loyal leadership within the government and military based on ideological choices, and that Biden had only shown weakness within the first few months of their administration.
America is going to face Al-Qaeda 3.0. The intelligence community has been clear and has briefed us repeatedly. The Taliban taking over means Al-Qaeda 3.0 comes roaring back. Except now we're in a worse position than we were before 2001. We have no bases in the region. Our local allies are being hunted down as we speak. And as you've heard today, the Taliban are going to be armed to the teeth so that when future American soldiers have to go back in to deal with the problem and deal with the incompetence of this administration, how many are going to die now? Because they're going to have to fight their way through our own equipment. Our own damn equipment.
By the summer of 2021, Afghanistan was lost to the Taliban and the first major pillar in the Western Bloc's power projection was lost, with no long-term gain having been made after 20 years of combat operations. When this occurred, it exacerbated the Eastern Bloc's confidence even more around the notion that the Democrats would only remain frozen while the Eastern Bloc began advances.
Let me answer the first question first. If Russia invades, that means tanks or troops crossing the border of Ukraine again. Then there will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it. No one expected the sanctions to prevent anything from happening. There has to show, this is going to take time. Without provocation, without justification.
The president believes that sanctions are intended to deter. And in order for them to work to deter, they have to be set up in a way where if Putin moves, then the costs are imposed.
But if you believe Putin has made up his mind, what leverage do you really have? Why not put those sanctions in place now?
The purpose of the sanctions has always been and continues to be deterrence. The deterrence effect of these sanctions is still a meaningful one, especially because, remember also, we still sincerely hope that there is a diplomatic path out of this moment.
Are you willing to get involved militarily to defend Taiwan if it comes to that?
Yes.
You are.
In the years that followed, as more advances occurred with the wars in Ukraine and Israel, it turned out that the Biden administration had been gate-holding by holding back as much as possible while acting like they were ardently opposed to Russia. Yet several times the administration made obvious mistakes and hesitations that have shown the East that the Western apparatus may be vulnerable due to its internal conflicts. This makes the East consider that now may be the best chance they may get for a long time to try to weaken the West, with the unexpected internal conflict within democratic countries occupying our attention. The record clearly shows the Democrats held back on actions that all became embraced later, and only caused hesitation within allies that surmounted to taking more damage from the enemy than was necessary.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has refused America's offer to evacuate him. In a video posted on Twitter, Zelensky said that the fight is here. US had reportedly offered to evacuate Zelensky to save him from being captured or killed by Russian forces.
President Joe Biden is still refusing to send MiG fighter jets to Ukraine, despite a plea from the Ukrainian president to Congress.
The Pentagon press secretary said last week that success for the U.S. in this mission in Ukraine is a free and independent, sovereign Ukraine. And if that's true, Mr. President, then send the fighter jets. Help Poland deliver their MiGs and help us backfill our NATO partners. The administration claims the reason they blocked this transfer is a concern about escalation.
Terry, let's talk about this new development. Poland announcing it's handing over its MiG-29 fighter jets to the United States. They could now be sent on to Ukraine. How significant is this update?
Well, we have to see if it happens, Claire. Poland has announced it's willing to hand over its MiG-29s to the United States. We don't know yet whether the United States is prepared to take them, even though we do know this has been under discussion for days. U.S. Secretary of State Tony Blinken confirmed that over the weekend. So we know that this has been something that Poland and the United States have been discussing. And of course, we hear from Ukraine daily that they need more fighter aircraft.
Obviously have to wait for the official announcement, which we're expecting in the next couple of days, to see what type of what they call multiple launch rocket systems, or MLRS, to see exactly which range the Americans will be sending. But it is now expected that those will be shorter range missiles that usually have a range of about up to 50, 60 kilometers, as opposed to the longer range one that could strike as far as 300 kilometers.
Hi, Victor. How are you?
Decided on the new Mr. President.
Will the United States provide F-16s to Ukraine?
No. Mr. President,
what is the position of the Pentagon, please? And then I have another question.
Sure. Our position hasn't changed. We believe that in order for
We believe that Ukraine can be successful in its goals by continuing to take back its sovereign territory and using U.S.-provided weapons to do that.
And then General Brown, sir, as Ukraine tries to defend itself against a renewed Russian offensive in Kharkiv, do you believe Ukraine should be able to use American weaponry to target Russian forces that are just right across the border there? Is that a recommendation you would make?
You know, our focus in support of Ukraine is being able to use capabilities, particularly the things that will impact the close battle in various areas. And we're paying attention to what's going on in and around Kharkiv. I won't publicly talk about what I might advise, but as we continue to support them, I'll continue to work with the Secretary as we make recommendations going forward. But the real key point is using the capabilities that we provided in the close battle in the areas that they are doing on the fronts that they're already operating on, as well as into Crimea.
And so are there still restrictions on Ukrainian weapons provided by the United States?
So our policies haven't changed. You've heard us say that the Ukrainians can use U.S. Security assistance to defend themselves from cross-border attacks, in other words, counterfire. But as it relates to long-range strike, deep strikes into Russia, our policy has not changed.
CNN has learned that 2 top Ukrainian officials will present the Biden administration with a list of targets inside Russia. A Ukrainian lawmaker tells CNN that face-to-face meetings are set to happen before the week is out in an effort to push the U.S. to lift restrictions on the use of American weapons against Russia. This comes after Moscow launched what Ukraine is calling another massive aerial attack on Kyiv. The overnight strike is Russia's third on the Ukrainian capital in the past 4 days.
As such, Biden administration gateholding has shown the Eastern Bloc that a Trump administration is not likely to be as easy on them by showing less restraint. That restraint is integral to the globalist regime's hold on power globally. Their top priority is to keep the United States and the Western allies as neutralized as possible, for as long as possible, most certainly willfully circumventing democracy within those nations. Ultimately, the globalist camp surmounts to an alien-backed occupational regime that is maintaining a global grip on power for non-human entities that sympathize with the desires of the transhumanists.
And I think this is a very extensive operation. I think it's very important that Mueller and his team went and found these people. This was a pretty sophisticated campaign. As you read through it, may have even been more sophisticated than the Trump campaign, as a matter of fact. I mean, I don't think at the end of the day it mattered to voters, but it certainly created the dissent. And there's not a single person who voted for Hillary Clinton that for the rest of their life won't think the Russians basically tipped this balance, and that's sort of what the Russians want to do. We've talked about Russians for a year, when really they probably didn't have a big impact in this race.
What has actually gone on is that the transhumanist agents who had established a two-party monopoly as a covert dictatorship found themselves unable to maintain that level of control. Instead of accepting being defeated democratically, they launched a cold civil war to purge their opposition and entrench themselves in power after what was an Eastern Bloc-initiated regime change in the form of COVID-19, overwhelming migrant caravans at the U.S. border, and nationwide riots that put the United States under siege during the election campaign of 2020. They used the 2020 election to stage a coup d'etat while maintaining plausible deniability.
I just want to talk to just on the phone call where it was so blameworthy and appears to be changing policies with respect to war funding and ammunition and not weapons against Israel. That's a possibility. But basically ordering them to negotiate with Hamas and to make a ceasefire with Hamas. Hamas hasn't agreed to any of this, as per usual.
Well, more than that, whenever the United States turns against Israel, the result is Hamas backs away from making any deals. Hamas says to itself, why should we give up any hostages? Biden's doing our job for us. CNN's doing our job for us. The New York Times is doing our job for us. Tony Blinken's doing our job for us. They're all making Israel lose. And if Israel is losing, no matter how many people die in Gaza, Hamas will continue. And so the Biden administration is not only betraying Israel, it's betraying the peace process. It is contributing to a continuation of Hamas fighting. I have to tell you, if Joe Biden had stuck with his original statement in support of Israel, this war would be over and every hostage would have been
Israel
released.
would have done the job it knows it can do. Wouldn't have had failure. Exactly. I couldn't agree with that point more.
Is Biden pushing Israel to accept a Hamas win?
Well, there's implications of that. They're certainly pushing Israel to make concessions to go to a ceasefire. Now, I really think behind the motivation of the president and his team is they really want the fighting to stop. They're not saying that, but I think that's the implication of it. And that, if that happens, underscore what you just said. Because if you leave multiple battalions effective in Gaza and most of the leaders effective in Gaza and the war terminates on those conditions, Hamas wins militarily in the long run. Why? Because they are effective enough to reattack at some point.
3 U.S. officials now telling ABC News that the U.S. is actually going to pause deliveries of ammunition to Israel. What more do you know about that? Is that a good strategy?
The gateholding of the globalists has extended to every area of government policy, and has also begun to affect the war in Israel and the Levant, where the Democrats again act as if they support Israel but in subtle ways hold back Israel in favor of appeasing foreign elements that are now demanding precedence within the United States and Europe. While acting as if they are concerned with Iran's aspirations towards a new Islamic Persian Empire, and its efforts via radical Islamic militancy, they also have taken efforts to suppress any criticism or resistance to the forced redistribution of the global population, mainly Muslim populations, into Western nations, which is a deliberate effort to infuse the Western apparatus with Islamic populations as quickly as possible. National borders and national sovereignty has become the final obstacle in totally recolonizing North America and Europe. This is not what liberal regimes call Islamophobia. The transhumanists use Islam as a tool, as Islam was created by the entity known as Ra, which was responsible for the slave regimes of ancient Egypt, South America, and Asia. Islam was created in the post-Roman age to directly offset the expansion of Christianity, and is ultimately under the control umbrella of transhumanist entities from outside of normal space-time, that have used advanced technology to alter our history and development in paranormal ways in an effort to become what they consider gods.
As combat forces leave Iraq, one major challenge remains: what to do with all the equipment, military vehicles, and bases left behind. We look at what's involved with that lesser-known aspect of the war operations, or perspective of having been through something like this. Give us a sense of the magnitude of an operation like this.
Well, everything has to be brought back, and we've been here almost over 9 years. All equipment, that's easy to bring back, but you have to also bring back all the clothing. You don't want Army uniforms getting into the hands of terrorists or parties that could use it against us in Afghanistan or elsewhere. But there will be computers, desks.
But why is it so important that this material be gotten out?
Well, first of all, you don't want to leave it to get in the hands of any kind of force that can be used against you.
I would not support this agreement for 1 second if I thought it put Israel in greater danger.
Let me make a final point. For a while now, the main contribution of some of my friends on the other side of the aisle have made in the fight against ISIL is to criticize this administration and me for not using the phrase radical Islam. That's the key, they tell us. We can't beat ISIL unless we call them radical Islamists. What exactly would using this label accomplish? What exactly would it change?
Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham goes on the record. Nice to see you, Senator.
Thank you.
Senator John McCain said earlier today that President Obama is directly responsible for Orlando attack, but then he clarified it a little bit later in a tweet saying, to clarify, I was referring to President Obama's national security decisions that have led to the rise of ISIL, not to the president himself.
Right.
Where are you on this?
Well, John's right about that. There would be no ISIL without Obama's decision to leave Iraq. To our soldiers who fought in Iraq, you did your job. The surge did work. Al-Qaeda in Iraq, which is the predecessor to ISIL, was on their knees. The military advised President Obama leave 10,000 troops in Iraq and we can stabilize it. He pulled them all out. 4 years ago, his national security team said, help the Free Syrian Army when Assad was on the ropes. If you don't, the terrorists will fill in the vacuum. So the decision to abandon Iraq, not help the Free Syrian Army 3 or 4 years ago, gave ISIL a foothold in Syria and Iraq, and the rest is history. So Barack Obama is to blame for the rise of ISIL. He has dismantled the ability to defend this country.
The terrorist network, also known as ISIS, presents the greatest threat the world has seen since the September 11th terrorist attacks.
This issue has become more imminently dangerous in recent years, and the real root of the problem lies with the 9/11 attacks having been a paranormal event, which caused a major divergence to what would have been a far less eventful timeline. 9/11 was a literal time attack, a temporal incursion, that radically changed the timeline and caused a major shift that almost destroyed humanity's proper future. Because humanity of this era leads and connects to a vast intergalactic community that stems from Earth tens of millennia from now, an intergalactic federation, many events in the last 200 years were the result of paranormal attacks that were introduced to radically change history in the favor of normal free humanity's enemies, the transhumanist camp. They have sieged this time period in an attempt to turn around their loss of umbrella at higher levels in the time war. As such, they most certainly are not expected to surrender power peacefully, or even allow the democratic process in America to unfold freely. While the Biden administration claims it is fighting and protecting the election from foreign interference, they are in actuality perpetrating the election interference themselves. They claim conservatives are favored by Russian intelligence, but all indications are that Putin, if he ever considered Trump less of a problem than the Democrats, clearly would not benefit from hard-line conservatives returning to power in America. Nor would any of the Eastern Bloc or rogue nations.
Что касается фаворитов, то не нам это определять. Это все-таки выбор американского народа. И, я уже говорил, у нас, фаворитом, если можно так сказать, был действующий президент, господин Байден. Вот его сняли с гонки, но он рекомендовал всем своим, сторонникам поддержать госпожу Харрис. Вот и мы тоже так сделаем, будем ее поддерживать. Это, во-первых. А во-вторых, и заразительно смеется, что это говорит о том, что у нее все хорошо. А если у нее все хорошо, то Трамп, он же ввел столько количества всяких ограничений и санкций в отношении России, сколько для него ни один президент раньше не вводил. А если у госпожи Харрис все хорошо, то, может быть, она воздержится от таких действий подобного рода.
Make no mistake, the eastern nations of Russia, China, North Korea, Belarus, Iran, Syria, and Houthi-controlled Yemen have forged an alliance and are knowingly probing the West for weaknesses. As far as they are concerned, with the globalists losing their grip on power in America, they should act to accelerate the West's decline and begin a new age dominated by the Eastern Bloc, centered around the dominance of Communist China, whose model is the ultimately preferred system of the transhumanists in the first place. As such, there is an effort to unduly influence the 2024 election, by the globalist occupational government that controls the US presidency. The purpose of the war in general is the same as keeping a knife against the throat of a hostage as tightly as possible so that a slight move will result in death. In this case, the ones holding the knife are the Democrats in America, Putin's regime in Russia, and Communist China. They are all part of the occupational government. Putin is a former Soviet communist that has adopted some capitalism, combined with the Soviet-style militarism has become a new age fascist, and has shown signs of paranormal influence just by launching the invasion of Ukraine. As such, the Galactic Federation-backed human resistance assures that if the globalist camp uses advanced means to cheat the 2024 election and attempts to hold on to power regardless, a global intervention will occur that will bring all nations' militaries under human resistance control, including the global nuclear arsenal, and a global adjudicator will manage Earth until stability can be restored. The same can be said if the Eastern Bloc launches any sudden global offensive to further exacerbate instability in the West. More information will be released when appropriate.